Previous sections in the Era of Imperialism has showed the Europeans colonizing Africa and China. We saw how the Industrial Revolution was a story of the have and the have-nots, and 10 European countries or so in the United States was able to colonize major portions of the world. That's going to be different when we actually get to Japan. We're going to actually see how the modernization of Japan will put it at as an anomaly to everywhere else in the world where, again, if you were a country that was reaping the success of the Industrial Revolution and had the tools, the medicine, and the weapons, you were able to force your will on other places. Japan is going to be different. And I think a major reason for that, why did Japan actually industrialize? And why would Japan be able to push back against European incursions, I think has a lot to do with geography. Here's again Great Britain in 1750, and the Industrial Revolution starts here. This is the time period again when our world is being forced together. And if we look at the role of geography, we can see how the tools from the Industrial Revolution spread, of course, first and foremost to countries that were close to Great Britain in Europe. And if we look at the areas of the world that have been colonized so far, we can look at Africa, we can look at the Middle East with the declining Ottoman Empire, we can look at India, we can look at China, and we can look at Japan. If we number off these places, Japan is farthest away from the heart of the Industrial Revolution, which means it has time to observe more of what is actually happening and to see more of the results of countries that had reaped the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. Africa was so close to Europe that the Industrial Revolution and then the Age of Imperialism hit it so quickly, it's almost like it didn't know what was happening. Same thing in the Middle East with the declining Ottoman Empire, in India, and in China. So Japan, far away, is able to watch and see what's happening and prep and plan and make a decision about, what's going to happen. The Industrial Revolution is coming to the rest of the world. It's forcing the world together. What is Japan going to do when the Industrial Revolution and then the era of imperialism makes its way to its country? Before that, in 1637, the story was similar to that of China. Tokugawa Ieyasu barred trade and interactions with foreign nations. With one exception, Japan had one port at Nagasaki that was open. The rest of Japan was closed off. However, news of the Opium War in 1839 and 1840 in China, the era when a British fleet, really decimated its Qing dynasty counterparts, and China was forced open and made to sign all these unequal treaties, and perhaps of everything that was happening in the rest of the world, forced the Japanese to decide what they're going to do. So they've seen what's happened in Africa, in the Middle East, in the Indian subcontinent, and the Qing dynasty. So Japan is the farthest away from, again, everything that had happened. The world is changing, so Japan has time to think about what they're going to do. The shogun at the time needed to decide what Japan was going to do. Were they going to close themselves off to the rest of the world and pretend that they can remain isolated, or would Japan open up? In an interesting bit of history, the United States actually kind of forced its hand. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States sailed a fleet of well-armed ships into Tokyo Bay and demanded that China open up trade at once. This is kind of like the 1793 McCartney mission, when the British McCartney guy went to China and said, "Will you trade with us?" Japan said no. Well, Matthew Perry showed up with a fleet of armed ships and a show of force and said, "We demand that you trade with us." And Japan agreed to open up and to say, "Okay, rest of the world, what's going on with this Industrial Revolution? Show us your methods, show us your medicine, show us your railroads, show us your weapons. We want to industrialize. We want to adapt and change too." But first, the 1854 Treaty of Kanagawa forced the shogun at the time, Isieda, to open up 3 ports. But Japan will say, okay, let's learn from what else has been happening in the world. How did Japan respond? Japan responded with a remarkable turn of face in its country, and it began to industrialize rapidly. But first off, frustrated daimyos, landlords, and samurai, the ancient warriors, removed the shogun and installed Emperor Mutoshito to power. Mutoshito, he took the term Meiji, which means enlightened rule. One of the things that he did was remove the capital from the ancient city of Kyoto to Edo, which would later be named Tokyo. And the Meiji Restoration from 1868 to 1912 begins, in which Japan begins to grow incredibly and remarkably strong. Japan decided it wanted to learn from the rest of the world, so it sent scholars all over the world to Europe and to the United States. And Japan decides that it's going to model its government after Germany. A diet, or a legislative body, was formed with a bicameral legislature. Suffrage voting was limited, and the emperor still maintained complete control. This takes us back to my diagram showing kind of the macro picture of world history. The age of absolutism was strong. It was strong in Japan, especially for its thousands of years of history, for its rich history. The age of enlightenment, the thinker, fueled the age of revolutions, which resulted in constitutions. And some parts of the world are able to more effectively limit the control of a ruler than others. So in the United States and Great Britain, the ruling monarchs, in Great Britain, the ruling monarch, or in the United States, the president's power was incredibly limited. But Japan, the emperor, still maintained absolute control. This is the announcement of the Meiji Constitution in 1889. It's a rule book. But the ability to limit their power was different. It wasn't as effective in terms of limiting the government's power as in other locations. But Japan entered into this climate where businesses began to grow, and business families, like kind of some household names like Mitsubishi and Kawasaki, became powerful business families akin to kind of like the Rockefellers in New York as well. So investment in Meiji Japan in banking and in railways and in manufacturing and in trade, these are all a result of Japan opening up and industrializing. How did Japan then turn the table and become part of the world, really the only part of the world that would embrace the westernization, if you will, and really actually turn the table? Japan's economic needs were driven by nationalism, and equipped with Western tools, sought to expand its reach. Returning to geography again, Japan has factories, railways, commerce, and it needed raw materials, especially coal, to drive its economic pursuits. Japan, as an island, Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, its four major islands, lack some of the raw materials that were needed to power, if you will, the industrial section of its country. So what it did is it sought to expand its reach and do exactly what European nations did before. Again, this area of imperialism is driven by the desire to enhance and expand production and markets. So in 1894, the Sino-Japanese War, Japan saw a weakened China, and Japan easily acquired the island of Taiwan from China, just like the British, just where the Germans had colonies in Qingdao and the British in Shanghai. The Japanese will become the first Asian nation to take Taiwan. This was especially humiliating to the Chinese, the Qing dynasty at the time. But then by 1904, 1905, the Russo-Japanese War, Japan went to war with Russia and won. It was the first time that a European country was defeated by an Asian power, shown in this political cartoon here. Here we have, again, a Russian soldier, I assume, looking and seeing the Japanese forces trample all over Korea. But at this time, the Japanese flipped the switch, took Manchuria, and took Korea as well. So this definitely signaled that Japan is an imperial power. In 1905, the Treaty of Portsmouth, Japan took control of Manchuria. This is where in really 1930, we'll see kind of the beginnings of the Second World War, and also Korea as well. Japan ruled Korea for 35 years. Korea famously described itself as a shrimp among whales during this time. And there was really a difficult history between the two nations, in which Korea was trampled on. In March 1st of 1919, known as the March 1st movement, Korea attempted to oust the Japanese, but to no avail. And it will be until the Second World War that Korea will eventually receive its independence, and we'll get into the Korean War after that. But this is Japan becoming a equal partner of the European nations that colonized the world. Great Britain, France, the United States. Japan joined that list, and it was going to continue to industrialize and expand its reach. And we can see here really the beginnings of the Second World War, when Japan and its economic pursuits and its efforts to industrialize will put it on a crash course with eventually the United States, resulting in the Second World War.